There you go.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This session is part of a series that we're running, both in person and remotely, giving some thought leadership on evolving threats from cyber attacks. A few points on housekeeping. Questions are welcome. Please use the QA section at the top and we'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the session. The session will be recorded and copies will be distributed. So if you need to drop off at any time, we will be able to get you a copy of the recording. We're also going to be sharing some of the content on our social media channels. So again, you'll be able to view it there. Just a few introductions from myself and Phil. So my name's Simon Nolan, CTO here at Matrix 247. I've been with the business for around 15 years now. My main focus, my day job, is looking after the operations team. So that's really ensuring that the customer experience is as best as it can be. Along with looking after the operations team, I'm also tasked with keeping track of what's going on in the sector, new threats that are impacting our customers, and looking for products that are out there that can assist our clients ultimately. Part of that process has led us to start working with Huntress. We've been a partner of Huntress now for about 6 months, and they've got some really good products in the cybersecurity space. Phil, do you want to do a short introduction?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Simon. So hello, everyone. My name's Phil McGowan. I work for Huntress as a sales engineer. So I'm a technical point of contact for our partners such as Matrix 247. My background is in cybersecurity. So I've spent the last 10 years or so working with a range of technologies that protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data.
Thanks, Phil. That's great. So a little bit about Matrix 247, people who don't know. We're an ICT company based in Haslingden in Lancashire. We've been trading for nearly 35 years now, and our USP is all about the client experience and customer satisfaction. It's a real focus throughout the business. So on to today's session. So the next slide you'll see, I just wanted to start by putting some buzzwords up that you may have seen on the news or in articles. I think the main point here is cyber threats are evolving with new ways of trying to breach clients' data. And also no longer are large enterprises only being affected. Lots of small businesses are now being targeted by sophisticated hacking groups who are trying to impact businesses and steal data. Consequences are now real world. So I read an article yesterday, which I'll link in the chat, about a school in London yesterday that had to send their pupils home after a ransomware attack. So we are seeing real world impacts now. On the next slide, I just wanted to flag some real world examples that we've seen here at Matrix just in the last 6 to 12 months. So CTS, we're a large outsourced IT company servicing law firms. Last year, they suffered a total outage that left 80 law firms without service for 4 to 5 weeks, not days, it was weeks. Some clients who we had mutual customers with didn't even have access to email during that period. So real world consequences of that was around 500 people had to delay house moves because the law firms was unable to process that sale. So real world impacts. That attack was a ransomware attack. So again, the data was encrypted. The only way to get back up and working for CTS was to pay the Bitcoin fee, and that was something that they was not willing to do. The police advised them not to, as did their insurance company. Phishing attacks. This is probably the most common type of attack that we see into our help desk. So this is a classic phishing email where hackers are trying to obtain your username and password. Once they have this, they've then got access to all the sensitive information that's in there. And then with services like Microsoft 365, they've also got access to your documents on OneDrive and possibly SharePoint as well. So, common kind of attack that we see. And then even us here at Matrix 247, we're not immune to threats. So at least once a month, we'll get an invoice from a supplier that on the surface looks genuine, but after some further checks, it's some form of invoice redirection scam. So this is where the hackers are trying to get us to pay money into their bank account rather than our supplier's bank account. So lots of kind of threats that are going on there. And the key message here is it is affecting small businesses. It's no longer just the large organisations. On the next slide, you'll see some stats here that kind of talk about the impact on small businesses. You know, they are being targeted now. Again, it's no longer large organisations that the target. Small businesses are in the sights of these hackers now. So over to Phil from Huntress now, who is going to show us how they can help us.
Absolutely. So thanks so much, Simon. It's great to have that introduction, really setting the scene about the threats that Matrix 247 have seen as a service provider. So to introduce Huntress, we are a security partner of Matrix 247, and we've built our security solutions specifically for our community, and specifically for small and medium-sized businesses. That those are the end customers that we serve. So we're a company that's designed to protect the 99%, because most of the businesses out there, the small and medium-sized businesses that form the backbone of our economy, are in fact small and medium-sized, rather than being enterprises like banks and airlines, etc. So we actually, as a company, secure over 100,000 organizations. So we ourselves get really good insights into the types of attacks that are out there. And today we'll shine a light on a few types of attacks that we need to be wary of. And we partner, if you look at the bottom there, with over 5,000 managed service providers. So our partners like Matrix 247 are the ones who know their customers best, and will really determine where and when Huntress is the right solution to protect those customers. But if you think about the technical environments that we protect, Huntress can be installed onto endpoints, and by an endpoint we mean a Windows operating system or a Mac OS operating system. So this could be a workstation, or it could be a server that's running Huntress software. We're actually installed on over 3 million devices like that. So over 3 million endpoints are currently protected by Huntress. And we also detect and respond to threats in the realm of Microsoft 365. So we actually protect over 1 million cloud identities as well. And today we have a few slides that will talk through the threats that are out there, but also the way Huntress can protect you in both of those environments. So yes, on the endpoint, but also in Microsoft 365. As Simon mentioned, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A section where you can put those questions in throughout the presentation, and we certainly will allow time at the end for any questions that come in. But let's really set the scene first, and this will show where Huntress fits within an overall stack of cybersecurity tooling. And we're going to use a home security analogy to explain this. So what we're going to go through is the NIST cybersecurity framework. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, and they've done a lot of research and publications on cybersecurity, and they came up with this very simple but powerful cybersecurity framework that has the 5 steps you see on the screen in front of us. So yes, there's identify, then protect, then detect, then respond, then recover. So let's think about securing our homes, and perhaps, as you've seen in the digital world with increasing threats there, perhaps there's been an increase in burglaries in your area. So how do you respond? Well, first of all, you want to logically start with identify. You want to be aware of your entry points to your home. So that would be the doors and the windows. You want to then move on to protect. You want to lock those doors and lock those windows. I put a question mark for now besides detect and respond, but recover in this context of home security would be, let's try to recover any goods that have been stolen by a successful burglary. And then detect and respond in this context would be security cameras pointing inside your home, so detecting when a burglar is inside, and similarly motion sensors to see when the burglar is in there. And respond would be, well, let's call the police, or if it's an office building, let's call the office security team. So subconsciously, we tend to have a logical framework when we think about home security, and this exact same framework can be applied to a digital asset, and that's really where we're coming from. So you will start again with identify. Let's be aware of all the digital assets that we have. So this will be the workstations, the laptops, the PCs, as well as the servers, as well as the cloud accounts, basically anywhere that houses your business data. And then you move on to protecting those assets with preventative cybersecurity controls. So there's some common ones listed here, which you may well be aware of already. So things like antivirus, things like firewalls, anything that's designed to keep the bad actors out of your environment. So a firewall, for example, will block connections that you don't want into your network. DNS filtering does a similar thing at the DNS level, and then email filtering is designed to block malicious emails from landing within your user mailboxes. So those are all protective controls. Again, we have a question mark for now beside detect and respond, but moving on to recover, if worse comes to worse and you suffer a cyber attack which is at least somewhat successful, you may need to revert to a backup in this digital realm. And traditionally, what we've seen with businesses is the majority of your IT budget and your security budget is spent on these types of preventative controls to stop the attackers getting in, but also the recovery tools such as backup and replication software. So this has left a little bit of a gap in detect and respond historically. And unfortunately, with the rise in sophistication of the threats that are out there, with the level of access that insiders have and the weaknesses inherent in human beings to lower down the defenses, we can't guarantee that your protective controls will be successful 100% of the time in keeping the attackers out of your environment. And that's where we find it's really valuable to have a partner like Huntress that will provide both the technology, that's the software that's installed, but also the security expertise that backs that up to detect and respond to attackers within your environment. So finding when they are in there, lurking in your environment, but also responding by kicking them out of the environment before they have a chance to do too much damage. So as mentioned earlier, that's a service that Huntress provides, that detection and response across both endpoints and Microsoft 365 identities. So hopefully that explains where Huntress fits in with other tools. We're absolutely not a silver bullet that solves all security challenges, but we are very specialized in detecting and responding to the threats that may exist within your environment. And this is a 24/7 service that will monitor for these threats. Thinking a bit more specifically about the endpoint, it's very common, and I imagine a lot of the audience today, if not all the audience today, will have antivirus software in one form or another installed onto their endpoints. Well, EDR, endpoint detection and response, fills in the gaps left behind by antivirus. So antivirus is very good at detecting the known bad threats. So threats that have been seen before, that the antivirus will have a signature file for, or threats that they know how to detect already because they've been seen in other customers' environments. AV is very good at blocking those. But any threat that's new, a zero-day vulnerability that's being exploited, for example, these unknown threats tend to get past antivirus. Or indeed, there may be some threats that require a human investigation in order to determine that this is actually a threat. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to differentiate between normal user activity on a device and what might be an attacker who now has access to that device. We're finding more and more that attackers are not just reliant on malware. Where they get a level of access, it could be through an open port, it could be you've connected to public Wi-Fi network that expose some of your details. Where an attacker gets that access, they'll often use whatever they find that's native to that cloud environment or that device that they've compromised. So just be using the same tools as you and as your IT administrators, such as PowerShell, for example. So until you have a human investigating the signals, the suspicious things that come out of the environment, it's difficult sometimes to determine just with software alone whether this is, again, normal user activity or an actual threat and an attack in progress. So if you look at advisories out there from people like Gartner, EDR, endpoint detection and response, is often considered as a mandatory capability in terms of your cyber defenses. So let's go a little bit deeper on the endpoint threat detection that Huntress can do. So once our agent software is installed onto your devices, we will start looking at everything that runs on the device. So what we're looking for is malicious processes. Well, first of all, we're actually looking for suspicious processes that we can then investigate with our human-led security operations center. The actual endpoint agent itself is very lightweight, so it consumes less than 2% of CPU, less than 20 meg of RAM, but it's able to collect all the telemetry for the processes that run, and we can differentiate between what might be an attacker carrying out a process and you as part of your normal day-to-day activity. For example, an attacker will be trying to escalate their privileges. Attacker might be enumerating the network, trying to find open ports on the network to move laterally. So the commands they run, the processes that they run as part of those attempts, those will be seen by Huntress. It sends a bit of a smoke signal to our SOC to take a response there. That's really the core, I would say, of endpoint detection and response, is not assuming that the device is not compromised, but looking at instead at every single process that runs. We also look for persistent footholds. It's a very common attacker tradecraft for attackers, once they do get access to a device, to install a program into the auto runs on the device that will give them persistent access to it. So, for example, they might install a backdoor that whenever the computer is booted, an auto run will run to fire up their backdoor program so that the attacker will then continue to have access to the device in question. So for this reason, Huntress analyzes everything that's in auto runs, and we can find if an attacker has put anything in there. Ransomware canaries is another way that we can detect an attack in progress. So ransomware canaries, you might consider these honeypot files. They're very lightweight files that we place onto a device where the Huntress agent is installed. So they'll be in a hidden folder, but they'll have normal document formats like .pdf, like .xlxx, and we monitor those files to see if they are modified in a way that suggests ransomware. So for example, an encryption of those files would lead to a response from Huntress, where we can lock down the device, isolate it from the rest of the network to stop the attack from spreading. We can also actively remediate a ransomware attack in progress. We also look at different points of the attack chain. So we're not just waiting for what might be the encryption of those ransomware canary files. We're looking for those earlier signs of vulnerabilities or attacks in progress. So a good example of a vulnerability would be an open port, something an attacker could use just to get access to your device. So if you have services like RDP or SSH open externally, we'll be able to flag that to your service provider, Matrix 247, who will then be able to take the appropriate action to close off that port. We also look for unsecured credential files. So we would consider this quite bad user behavior, but unfortunately it does happen that sometimes users will store their passwords in a file. Could be a document or a spreadsheet that they're keeping on their desktop or in their documents, somewhere like that. And this would just contain a list of passwords. Often it's a bit of a giveaway if the name of the file is also password or some variant of the word passwords. And what Huntress does is we actually proactively search for these files, so we can again create an incident in the console for our partner Matrix 247, let them know this file exists, because rest assured that attackers, if they get access to your environment, they'll be looking for these passwords as well. And if you've listed all the passwords nicely for them in plain text, you're really just increasing the blast radius of the attack you've suffered, because the attacker can then compromise more and more of your accounts. So that's a few examples. It's not an exhaustive list, but that's how we find threats living on the endpoint. So let's move now to M365 here, standing for Microsoft 365. We're seeing more and more businesses are moving their data into the cloud, and very often that's into things like SharePoint, into things like OneDrive that live in Microsoft 365, as indeed does email a lot of the time. If you're using Exchange Online, that's running out of Microsoft 365. And what we're looking for from a Huntress perspective in the Microsoft 365 tenants that we are monitoring is unwanted access. So this would be an attacker taking over one of your Microsoft 365 accounts. So we're monitoring who is logging in, where are they logging in from? Is there anything unusual about this login? So is it a location that does not match the location set for the tenant overall? Or is it a location that's not expected based on the history of a particular user? Or even the IP address that's being used to log in, is this already known as bad? If it's a VPN that's associated with attacker activity, for example, or if it's from a proxy service that's known to be used for malicious activity, like Tor, the onion router. And then the second bullet point here, token theft. I won't say too much about this now because we're going to go a little bit deeper on token theft in just a moment, and walk through an example of how attackers are using a tool called Evil Drinks to steal session tokens. And this actually bypasses multi-factor authentication. But post what might be that initial compromise of your Microsoft 365 account, we'll look for what the attacker might do next. And as Simon mentioned earlier on, you get things like invoice redirection scams. And as part of those scams, very often what the attacker will do is they'll create inbox rules to gain the intelligence of, well, what are the emails coming into the inbox that contain words that the attacker is certainly very interested in. So words like payment, invoice, contract. Let's maybe set up a rule if I'm the attacker that finds these emails and perhaps even hides those emails from the legitimate user of that mailbox. And simply they can do this by moving the emails that match certain criteria from the inbox to the conversation history folder. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I log into my email, I'm focusing on what's on the inbox. I'm not really looking periodically at the conversation history folder as a matter of course, because I'm just going off what's in the inbox and what I'm responding to. So if an attacker has created a rule that's moving certain emails into the conversation history folder, I probably don't know about it. And that's what can result in an attacker using your inbox to have a conversation with your suppliers and setting up this payment redirection scam. So we have detectors that scan the inbox rules and find the suspicious behavior such as that. We can even disable and work with our partners to delete these inbox rules where they do show up. And then privilege escalation is often part of any kind of attack, including an attack against Microsoft 365. So privilege escalation would be the attacker trying to get global admin access so they can do more damage, or simply modifying the permissions within the Microsoft tenant overall so that they're able to do more damage. If we find any of these things and we are confident that an attacker has taken over the account, in terms of a response, that's the kind of next bit after detect is respond, right? What we will do is kill the session and lock out the user, so their password can safely be reset by Matrix 247, and then kind of normal access can be resumed by just the legitimate user. So let's think about how an attack might play out. And this is high level, first of all, and then we'll go into a more specific example in a bit more technical detail. But thinking about a typical attack, and as Simon mentioned earlier, phishing attacks are very common. So let's say the attacker does send a phishing email to an admin with a fake password reset link. The admin maybe hasn't done their security awareness training, maybe is not fully concentrating that day, thinks the link is genuine, clicks it, and then thinks they are resetting their password. But really, all they are doing is revealing their credentials to the attacker, who, now that they have stolen those credentials, they use a Tor browser to log into the Microsoft 365 account. They then create a new user, escalate that user to an admin role so that the user is able to create inbox rules, as we mentioned a moment ago, that will forward invoice and payment related emails. So if there's forwarding to an external domain being used, then an attacker, even if they lose their access to logging into the actual account itself, they'll still have a copy of the emails that they were looking for, so long as that forwarding rule is in place. Sometimes what we see is the kind of access of the attacker has been taken away from a login perspective, but the inbox rules can remain undetected for some time. People are sometimes quite shocked when they realize what their inbox rules are actually doing in terms of moving emails around. And then sadly, if the environment is unprotected, if Huntress is not in place, then there is certainly a risk that payments will be diverted away from the company itself and into the attacker's bank account instead. So let's think about how this might play out with a protected Microsoft 365 environment, one which has Huntress in place. Similar to the endpoint, where Huntress is sitting alongside antivirus and not so much stopping the attackers from getting in, but really responding if they do access the environment. The way we do that on the endpoint, it's actually very similar within Microsoft 365. So you have your technologies like email filtering, other technologies designed to prevent the attacker access. But if it does happen, that's where Huntress can really detect what's going on within the environment itself. So this is the same attack. We're just going to show where kind of Huntress kicks in here, right? So the attacker sends the phishing email with the fake password reset link. Again, the admin falls for it, goes to reset their password, and in so doing, reveals their credentials to an attacker. The attacker then logs in, but as soon as they do so, as I mentioned earlier on, Huntress will isolate the account. So we'll kill the session and we'll lock out the account because we've seen that it's been accessed by an attacker. We'll see this because it will be a different IP being used or a different location being used. There'll be multiple of the data points that we track that are different when the attacker logs in than the data points typically are when the legitimate user logs in. So the attack proceeds no further because we've isolated the attacker before they even had the chance to create the inbox rule. There was no user role elevation, no creation of kind of rogue global admins. Our detection of the kind of known high threat IPs and location has stopped the attack from progressing. Even the detection of the Tor browser would have been in place by Huntress. So the outcome is very much the attack is thwarted, and we're really minimizing that risk that your business will lose money to a cyber attack. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper next and think about an attack which sadly we've seen be very prevalent in recent times, and it's called session token theft. So this goes a little bit deeper into how the authentication, not just for Microsoft 365, but also for how many cloud accounts work. So although the example we're giving is Microsoft 365, bear in mind other cloud accounts you use might be vulnerable to this same kind of attacker tradecraft. So let's start off with thinking about the authentication, right? Thinking about the legitimate user logging into what you see here is the legitimate login page. So it's just login.onmicrosoft.com. And when the user goes there, they're asked for a few things, well, three things, right? So they're asked for their username, they're asked for the password that matches that username, and then they're also prompted for an MFA code. So MFA standing for multi-factor authentication. This is where Microsoft will ask the user to use their registered MFA device, which is typically a phone, to provide a code that proves that it's them. So the user is demonstrating that there's something they know, which is obviously their username and password. They're also demonstrating who they are by something they have, and that's that MFA device, that phone, where they've got the MFA code from. So they've given all of these three things to Microsoft, and Microsoft's checked them and said, well, that's okay. In return, what the user receives is a session token. So this is just a long string of text, but it's very convenient because this text will be stored in the browser. And so it allows you to have that ongoing session within Microsoft 365 without having to continually re-authenticate so long as you have the session token in the browser. And this is how you have your continued access to your email, for example. As long as the session token is there and valid, Microsoft's happy to keep providing the normal services to you. So let's think about, and this is just the Microsoft 365 kind of dashboard here, where you might be using, as I said earlier, Teams or Outlook or SharePoint or OneDrive from Microsoft 365. This is really what the attacker wants access to. But when the attacker tries to sign in, very often, and this could be somewhat scary, right? They will know your username and password. Your username is probably quite easy to guess. It will be your email, right? So it might be publicly known. That's very often the nature of email. Or it might be easy to guess because there'll be a consistent format for email within your company. So within your domain, you'll have the same sort of format, whether it's first name, last name, or just a letter from the first name, then the last name, and then @yourcompany.com. The attacker will probably know your username pretty easily. And the scary thing is as well, they might actually know your password, because there have been a lot of data breaches over the years, and credentials have been leaked publicly by attackers. So particularly if you have reused passwords that you've ever used elsewhere, perhaps even on a kind of personal service, a personal cloud account, and now you're reusing that same password for your corporate business function, the attacker has a decent chance at being able to guess or otherwise brute force your password. What the attacker will struggle with is the MFA code, because they don't have your phone. Unless they physically stolen it from you, they won't be able to provide that MFA code when Microsoft asks for that MFA code, that proof that they are who they're claiming to be, with your username and password. So that's where the attacker falls down if they're just trying to sign in as usual. But there is a tool out there which, unfortunately for us as the defenders, will help the attacker out. So it's a tool called EvilJinx. If you don't believe me, go to help.eviljinx.com. You'll be able to read all about this free and open source tool. It has lots of helpful guides for how anyone can use it to steal session tokens. So EvilJinx is actually a reverse proxy. So what it will do is it will proxy the connection between you as the user and the legitimate Microsoft 365 login page. And we'll get into how this works in just a second. But typically the attack starts, as so many attacks do, with an email. It's around about 9 out of 10 attacks are starting with an email. And it's just a phishing email that the attacker is sending, right? And this would be an example they might use for trying to hack into Microsoft 365. So they're saying, look, social engineering here, this is urgent, account action is required. Please log in here, and there's a helpful link for you to receive further instructions. Well, if you fall for this, and from time to time, if you have enough phishing emails come through, one of your users will fall for this. The user clicks on the link, and they are actually then taken to the legitimate Microsoft 365 sign-in page. And by the way, that we have these, or EvilJinx has these fishlets, these kind of phishing kits for lots of different cloud services. So you see a whole range listed here. It's not just Microsoft, but M365 is what we'll focus on today. So EvilJinx is actually sitting in the middle here. So as I say, it's a proxy between the user and the legitimate Microsoft 365 login page that they've been taken to. And it's a transparent proxy, so the legitimate user has no idea that EvilJinx is sitting between them and the Microsoft 365 sign-in page. So they feel quite confident to supply their username and password that then goes via EvilJinx to the Microsoft 365 sign-in page. So the credentials that have been supplied are just being forwarded on to the sign-in page. That username and password is supplied, but bear in mind, as we had in our example of a legitimate login earlier on, the communication's two-way here. So Microsoft will then ask, right, now I've seen your username and password, I need the corresponding multi-factor authentication. So it asks EvilJinx for this, but EvilJinx will actually forward that request back to the user, asking for the MFA code. The user, again, unaware that EvilJinx is in the middle of the connection here, will supply the MFA code, and then the attacker can happily supply that MFA code to Microsoft 365. And we know what's going to happen next, right? The session token is provided to the attacker. So this is an attacker in the middle attack. This is what it looks like from the EvilJinx console. They're just getting all the plain text information that's being sent from the user to Microsoft 365. So that would be, yes, the username and password, then the MFA code when that's prompted for, but then crucially, they can also see what comes back the other way. So they can see that session token that Microsoft provides. That's there within their EvilJinx console for them. And that's really all they need, because then they can go to the Microsoft 365 sign-in page. They don't even need to bother with entering in the username, password, or anything like that. They're just using the session token at this point to gain access to the Microsoft 365 login page. So that would be a successful attack for the attacker. As I say, we are seeing this be quite prevalent, and so much so that we've really fine-tuned our detectors. to look at the data points for a Microsoft 365 session and track those to ensure consistency. So if you are logging into Microsoft 365 from your device, which is maybe Windows, and you're using your normal browser, which is maybe Chrome, you'll have an IP address, you'll have a user agent, all of these data points in place. And those will be tied to your session ID. That's the way we pull the logs and we track the data points to tie them to the session ID. If we see there is a change and we're seeing new data points show up within the same session ID, that's suspicious. So even if the attacker has the session token, they've managed to steal that. They probably will be logging in from a different location. They may well be using a different operating system and browser as well. Certainly their user agent will be different, the IP address will be different. So these are all things that we can see, and we can use that to say, well, hang on a second, this is not right. And we can take that isolation action we mentioned earlier on. So just kick the attacker out of the environment and lock out the account until it can all be kind of safely recovered. So that was the example I had. I wanted to go into a little bit more detail, and I guess the kind of closing message from me would be, look, it's fantastic that if you have MFA in place, we would absolutely encourage that, but just having MFA in place does not mitigate all of the attacks that are out there. So it's best to kind of continually review things and see, are there other ways you can improve your defenses? Yes, you might have the preventative controls that you're confident in to stop the majority of the attacks from being successful. But if an attacker does get access to your environment, whether it's Microsoft 365 or whether it's the endpoint, well, what happens next? And I think Huntress, working in conjunction with our partner Matrix 247, we can really help to answer that particular question. So thanks very much for your time today. We appreciate that, and let us know if you have any questions. I haven't been monitoring the chat myself, but if there are any questions there, then hopefully somebody will come off mute and read them out.
No, that's really insightful, that Phil, and it's stuff that we see on the ground there with the day-to-day operations about the types of attacks and how you can prevent them. Just while we're waiting to see if we've got any questions that do come through, I'm just going to put a link in the chat about the CTS hack that I mentioned on the introduction, so you can read about it on the BBC website there. I'll also put a link in as well about the school attack that we've seen. I think the big key point, the message for me, is that there is ways that you can protect yourself. Huntress are a great partner to work with. They are truly 24/7 like Matrix are. So there's good synergies there. So we know that if something's identified at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, then they're going to get through to our out-of-hours engineers who can immediately jump on something to stop an attack happening. And that's kind of really important to us. And we've seen that already, that they have called us out of hours and we have been able to react to ultimately protect our customers. So doesn't look like we've got any questions coming through. If anyone does have any questions at a later date, please put them in the chat. Reach out to us on our contact details or contact the account manager. We're always available to help. But thanks a lot for your time today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry, just before you jump off, we have got a question. Just bear with me.
Yeah.
Sorry, we've got a question. If you pop it in the chat.
Oh, I can just see it now. So probably one for. So we've got a question for you here, Phil. So what's the difference between antivirus and EDR? So do you just want to touch on that again, Phil?
Yeah, sure. So antivirus is really focused on blocking threats that are known bad. So typically how it will work is there'll be a database of those threats and signatures for each threat, so they can be identified whenever they occur. So that's really what an antivirus is doing. It's really focused on stopping bad things from actually running on the endpoint at all. Whereas EDR takes a different approach. So EDR will look at everything that runs on the endpoint, monitor all of those processes, just to see if antivirus has let anything through. So the two technologies really do work in conjunction. We don't recommend that you kind of uninstall your antivirus and just use an EDR. It is best to use both. But we have some interesting options these days around using things like Defender that might be inbuilt into the Windows operating system alongside Huntress. So there are options for different ways Huntress can work with antivirus. But yes, it's best to use both tools to make sure you're protected.
Yeah, definitely, I agree there. We've got a question, another question. What other tools does Huntress integrate with, Phil?
So we integrate with some of the tools that our service providers use from a ticketing perspective, and the remote monitoring and management tools that be used to install Huntress onto endpoints. And then from a Microsoft 365 perspective, obviously we're integrating with the Microsoft 365 tenant. So you would install an enterprise app into your Microsoft 365 tenant that will then use the Microsoft Graph API to send over the audit log to Huntress, and that's where we will run our detections against what's within that audit log. So those are our main integrations with your service provider tools, ticketing and RMM, but also with Microsoft 365 environments. And bear in mind, we can also talk to Entra to do the things like the lockout of the users where that's necessary.
Yeah. Thanks for that. What sets Huntress products apart from others in the market? I'll let you take the first part of that, and then I can add a little bit on about Huntress as well, Phil.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of what sets Huntress apart is we do work with managed service providers like Matrix 247. You guys would be the experts on your customer environments, and it's a strong partnership. It's not just technology that makes this work; it's the whole humans and the process behind it. But I would just come back to the start of kind of introducing Huntress in the presentation. We are built for small and medium-sized businesses, so we're really focused on those. You'll see a lot of our competitors who might have fantastic technology. What they're doing is they're starting with the enterprise and maybe coming down market to the SMB space. And the trouble with that is often even the kind of licensing doesn't make sense. So there'll be like add-ons or pay gates that are necessary to get the full service. Whereas with Huntress, it's just one flavor. We're always providing a 24/7 monitoring of wherever Huntress is deployed, because wherever it's deployed, we want to be confident that the end customer is protected. So we start with that security goal, and we just make the solution work towards that goal.
Yeah. And I think from my side, part of my remit is to look at the other competitors on the market when we was looking at EDR and do the beauty parade and see who are the best providers out there. And I think it was really apparent from an early stage about Huntress's ethos to working with people like Matrix 247 from a security point. The model is really simple to use, and we've got insight into people like yourself, the account managers there that can really help drive the messaging out there to our clients. So I think that was something that was maybe missing from the other players out there. Like you say, they tend to be more enterprise led, where Huntress have been really helpful to us in terms of that SME space. So it doesn't look as though we've got any further questions. I'm just conscious of time. We're pretty much done there. So again, thanks for everyone for your time today. Hopefully it's been insightful. We will share the recording. And yeah, if there's any further questions, reach out to anyone. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, everyone.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.